Saltwater Orchard, Chapter 13. Richard. Richard stared at the estimate from the plumber and tried not to groan. He loved his Uncle Art, but the man had updated nothing at the farmhouse in decades. Just about every faucet dripped, and the toilets were cracked. All of it needed to be replaced. There was water pooling in the basement from leaking throughout the pipes in the house. If Richard ever had any hope of selling the property, he would need to update all the plumbing fixtures and make sure all the lines were solid. Thankfully, the electrician had at least fixed the power easily. A breaker had popped at some point, probably from a storm. Once Richard had discovered the issue, he had tried resetting it himself before giving up and calling in the electrician. The man had raised an eyebrow at the panel, however, and strongly suggested he update the electrical. That estimate was on its way, and he wasn't sure he wanted it. The cost of inheriting Saltwater Orchard was starting to worry him. Money wasn't an issue. After paying off his student loans, he had worked hard to build his savings and investment accounts. A year off from his bank job shouldn't hurt him too much. However, he needed to make the farm viable. Otherwise, what was the point? If he couldn't make the farm work, he might as well take anything with sentimental value and give the rest to the Haven Fire Department. He had known this project wouldn't be easy, and it was for that reason he'd wanted to do it. Richard loved a good challenge. He wanted something that would be interesting and diverse and hard work. Banking had lost its luster in recent years, which was something he hadn't realized until he had arrived at the farm. He no longer woke up dreading his day. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He woke up looking forward to what the day would bring. Ryan's face popped into his head. It wasn't just because of the pretty brunette that was now living on his second floor. At least not the entire reason. He stood in the doorway to the den, hands on hips, as he surveyed the room. He let out a loud sigh. There were books everywhere. 3 sides of the room had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Each shelf had books crammed into every available spot. There had to be thousands of books here. He gave in and let out a loud groan. "What am I going to do with all of this?" he muttered under his breath. Now who's talking to themselves? Startled, he spun and saw Ryan walking down the stairs. She was so beautiful. Her hair was in her customary high ponytail. She was already dressed for work in a pair of black pants and a white blouse. She had her hands behind her back as she finished tying on her red apron. "Richard, are you okay?" He blinked. Ryan stood in front of him, face tipped up to catch his gaze, frowning at him. He shook his head and smiled down at her. "Sorry, yeah, I just got lost in thought there for a minute." With her hair up, all he could do was stare at her neck and that little spot where it met her shoulder. He leaned forward because the thought of planting a kiss right there was almost more than he could resist. Shaking his head slightly, he took a hasty step back before he acted on his thoughts. "Get a grip, Mosley." He cleared his throat before saying out loud, "I was just wondering what to do with all these books. What do you think?" Richard turned, making himself wait for her to answer. "Do you want to keep them?" "Not particularly. I like to read, but not enough to have my own library." "That's an idea." Ryan tapped a finger on her chin. "I said I didn't want my own library." "I heard you. Not you. The town library. Every spring they do a massive book sale to raise funds to buy new books." Doesn't that defeat the purpose? They have books already. Why sell them to buy more? Why not just keep what they have?" "The library can't keep every single book it's ever owned. There's just not enough room." "Well, they'd look like this." Ryan waved a hand at the room. "Once people stop checking out a book, the library sells it. They only keep books on the shelves that people borrow." "Huh. I never thought of that. Makes sense." Richard put his hands on his hips and looked around the room once more. "Do you think they'd take all of them? There's got to be hundreds in here." "I'll stop by and ask while I'm in town today." Turning, Ryan yelled up the stairs, "Put the book down and let's go, Erica." Shaking her head, she turned back to Richard. "She's a little put out you had the electricity fixed." Richard chuckled. "I can't say the same for myself. It's kind of nice to flip a switch at night and have lights." "Agreed," Ryan said as she laughed with him. The clattering of feet announced Erica's arrival. "Hi, Mr. Richard. Bye, Mr. Richard." Richard laughed outright as the little girl flew by him out the front door. "If only I had that much energy," Ryan muttered as she hurried after her daughter. She waved a hand over her shoulder at Richard as she practically ran out the door after Erica. Richard wasn't sure what he would do when the house was done. He enjoyed having Ryan and her daughter in the house. Far too much. Richard let loose with a loud "Achoo!" as the dust from the books billowed up around him. He had been sneezing all morning as he stacked books into boxes. How his uncle had the time to read so many, he didn't know. Then again, the man was retired. Maybe that was the key. He had 2 entire bookcases emptied, and the room was starting to echo slightly. Standing, he leaned back to stretch out his back before walking over to the next case to unload it. Starting at the top, he reached up and pulled a stack of books off. An envelope floated down, landing at his feet. Setting the books on a nearby chair, he stooped to pick it up. The front had the words, "The Truth," scrawled across it. He didn't recognize the handwriting. Flipping it over, he opened the flap and pulled out a single piece of paper. Unfolding it, he began reading. The truth. Life is messy. Life is hard. But without you by my side, it would be impossible to bear. Thank you for always being there. Life with you is still messy. Life with you is still hard. Your grace is a lifeline when I stumble and fall. Your word always guides me through it all. Life will always be messy. Life will always be hard. But your truth is the rock on which I stand, for you always answer all of life's demands. Matthew 19:25-26. Richard read the words again. He knew the reference at the bottom had something to do with the Bible. Scanning the books still on the shelves, he spotted a thick black book nearby. Pulling it off the shelf, he sat in his uncle's recliner. He let out a small groan at sitting down for a few minutes. Letting the Bible fall open, he began looking for the book of Matthew. It took him a few minutes, but he got there. Flipping the pages, he found the verses referenced in the poem. He read them once, twice, and then moved to the start of the chapter. Settling back into the chair, he continued reading. He forgot time as the truth of the words began to sink into his soul. Chapter 14. Ryan. Ouch! Ryan yelled as she pinched her finger between the box she carried and the side of the truck Richard had rented to haul off the books. She dropped the box onto the tailgate. Richard would have to lift it into place. She gave a grateful sigh and shook her hand to help get rid of the pain. This was the last load being donated. Richard had spent the day packing up the books. She had already worked the morning shift at the cafe, and now she had spent the afternoon helping to load and haul the books to the library. She was looking forward to getting off her feet. It surprised her at how many trips they'd made so far. The donation of books had thrilled the head librarian. Since there were so many, they decided to hold a special Art Carruthers Memorial Book Sale before the annual Spring Festival. They also planned to do a small dedication to their historical fiction section in his name. Glancing over at Richard as he heaved the last box over the side of the truck, Ryan swallowed hard. She was trying not to admire the biceps she could see bulging from under his sleeves. She needed to remember this was a professional relationship only. No muscle admiring allowed. Phew! I think I got my workout moving all these boxes. How many books do you think there were? I didn't remember to count them. Richard wiped a hand over his face, leaving behind a streak of dust on his cheek. She clenched her hand so she wouldn't reach out and wipe it off. She made herself look away before saying, there had to be at least 2,000, although right now it feels like 2,000,000. So many boxes. I'm not sure the library really knew what they were agreeing to. She laughed, and Richard joined in. The work had been hard, but the house was starting to feel empty. She was looking forward to ripping off the hideous wallpaper from the 1970s that covered every wall. Erica bounced up beside Richard and tried to peer over the side. Wow! Look at all the books! What are you going to put in that room now, Mr. Richard? I'm not sure. What do you think I should do? He grinned at the little girl. His patience with her daughter, as she peppered him with questions, still amazed Ryan. He gave her thoughtful answers and never brushed her off. Erica seemed to always seek him out. Ryan's head snapped up from her musings when she heard Erica squeal. Richard was holding the little girl up so she could see inside the back of the truck. Mr. Richard, I'm up so high! The delight in Ryan's heart at the sight of her daughter, happy and smiling, filled the empty places she hadn't realized were in her soul. The last 7 years of raising Erica by herself had been more difficult than she'd realized. Add her daughter's diabetes, and the difficult was even more challenging. Everything was just so hard lately. Straightening her spine, she firmed her resolve. This was only a temporary situation. Soon enough, she'd be back on her own. She didn't want to get used to relying on someone else for help. While it had been nice having Richard here, it wouldn't last. He had already made that clear. It was time to stop having her little pity party. Ryan had managed to this point by herself. She could manage going forward. Okay, enough fooling around, she said. Let's get these books delivered. One room down. How many more to go? 6, I think. And who knows how many closets. Richard set the little girl back down and tousled her hair. Erica grinned at him. Ryan's heart clenched at the sight. Anyone watching would realize the young girl was becoming attached to Richard. She would need to have a talk with Erica tonight. She didn't want her little girl's heart to be broken when they moved on. And they would have to move on. Richard planned to fix the house, get the farm operating at a profit, and then sell it. She wished she had a way to buy it, but she knew that was just a dream, one that would never come true, just like the rest of all of her dreams. She didn't even have enough money to have a place for them to live, let alone purchase a place like this. Are you coming? Ryan jumped. Richard stood holding open the truck's passenger door for her. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was wool gathering, apparently. Where? I don't see any wool, Mommy. Erica scrambled in the open door and settled herself in the middle of the bench seat. It's just a saying, kiddo. Means I was daydreaming. Ryan stepped onto the running board and slid onto the bench seat beside her daughter. Richard gave the door a tap before shutting it. She couldn't help but watch as he hurried around to the other side. He looked good in the black and white flannel hanging open over the white t-shirt. It was then she realized how he no longer looked out of place in his clothes. They fit him. He fit into Haven now. She wondered what it would feel like to run her fingers through his hair as he held her close and kissed her. She sat bolt upright. What's wrong, Mommy? Nothing, baby. Ryan patted her daughter's knee. She shouldn't be thinking about kissing Richard or running her fingers through his hair. That was it. His hair. He had stopped mashing it to his head with gel every day. She glanced over to where he now sat behind the wheel. She liked how his hair covered his forehead and ears. It was messy, but in a good way, like he had just run his hands through it. Her fingers itched to reach over and play with where it touched the back of his neck. Ryan stared straight ahead as she swallowed against the sudden dryness in her mouth, because the man looked good. Too good. She could feel the heat creeping up her cheeks. Mommy, you're all red. What's wrong? Nothing, baby, she mumbled again, turning her head to look out the window. She couldn't meet his gaze right now. Would not. Yet she glanced over at him all the same. He was looking straight ahead with a smile on his face. Great. Just great. I'm tired. Can I go read? Erica whined at Ryan. Sure, kiddo. She watched as her daughter, with more energy than she'd shown in the last 2 hours, scampered off to dive into her latest book. They'd picked up the last 2 in the Little House series from the library when they dropped off the last load of books. Ryan yawned and stretched her arms. It had been a long day of working at the cafe and then helping to move all the boxes of books. She would love to go curl up and read with Erica, but she needed to make supper. She walked into the kitchen and stopped short. Richard sat at the table with his head bent over whatever he was working on. The butterflies that came to life in her stomach made her catch her breath. He glanced up and their eyes caught. She tried to swallow, but there was nothing there. Her mouth had gone dry. What was wrong with her? She was a grown woman, with a child no less. She didn't have time to act like a love-struck teenager around this man. Turning abruptly, she began pulling ingredients out of the fridge, tossing them on the counter. What are you making for dinner? What? Ryan glanced at Richard with confusion. I asked you what you're making. I heard you the first time. Flustered, she turned back to the counter, trying to ignore the rumble of laughter coming from the direction of the table. She looked at the jumble of ingredients sitting there. She didn't know what to make. She just started grabbing ingredients since she'd been focused on something else. Well, someone else. There was half a rotisserie chicken, bacon, lettuce, tomatoes, and pickles. Pickles? She hated pickles. I'm making BLTC sandwiches. That sounded as good as anything else, and she was sure there was still some potato salad. She opened the fridge door again. Sure enough, a half-full container sat on the shelf. She snatched it out and added it to the pile of ingredients. She put the pickles back in before shutting the door. BLTC sandwiches? Ryan started as Richard's voice came from right behind her. She'd been concentrating so hard on what to make with the jumble of ingredients, she hadn't heard him get up and move closer. Bacon, lettuce, tomato, and chicken. Turning, she found him standing far closer than she realized. She prayed her face wouldn't heat up and give her away. She tried to back up, but found herself against the counter. Her voice trailed off. Looking up into his eyes was a mistake. She couldn't focus on anything else but the deep brown color that seemed to pull her in. The butterflies from earlier seemed to have multiplied, causing a frenzy of dancing sensations. She swallowed against the dryness that seemed to fill her mouth again. "Thank you for making supper for me." His voice was low and husky. "What? Of course." She went to move past him to get out of the spell of his eyes, but he placed a hand on her arm. "Richard, I need to go check on Erica." But Ryan didn't move. She could barely breathe, and she knew she was blushing harder every second she stood there. "She's fine. She has a new book. Stay. Just for a minute. I want to ask you something." "Oh?" She looked up again. She needed to get a grip on herself. Every time she made eye contact with him, she couldn't think of anything, not even her own name. "I know you wanted to keep this a professional relationship, but I was wondering." "Mommy!" Ryan closed her eyes at the sound of her daughter's voice ringing out from the top of the stairs. "Be right there," she called back. "I need to go." Richard caught her gaze and opened his mouth as if to speak, but closed it. He dropped his hand and stepped back. She scurried past. She glanced back at him as she left the room. He was still standing there, watching her go. Erica either had great timing or horrible. Ryan wasn't sure which.